So thank you all for joining. I'm Gallagher. I've been at Mathspace for 10 years, and before that I was a teacher for 10 years. And beside me is one of our founders, Mo.
Hey, a lot of familiar names in the chat, so welcome to everyone. Today we're going to show you some of the brand new textbook that we have built.
Nice print one. A third book that is very much not dead.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Aaron and I have been kind of chatting about like where was the moment where we kind of realized that the textbook is still a thing. And by no means do we say the textbook is everything. We're still strong believers in a digital kind of approach and a digital first approach. An aha moment was post-COVID actually. So during COVID, obviously everyone got thrown in to digital. And so we had a huge uptake of usage and a lot of people using Mathspace for the first time. Then after COVID, when schools started to go back, we saw some of our best schools that use Mathspace a lot. Actually, their usage dropped to not just pre-COVID levels, but even lower. And so we reached out and said, hey, what's going on? Is there anything going on? And like, no, we still love Mathspace. We're using it all the time, but we're actually just printing the worksheets and doing a lot of work offline. And just because we just want to detox the students off digital, I just had a lot of exposure to digital. And that was a bit of an aha moment. And it's something that we've been kind of going through the years thinking about it. One of the areas that you've been working on is the worksheets. So maybe you can talk about how you saw the worksheets developing over time.
Yeah, so if you've been using Mathspace for a while, you'd remember that about 2 years ago, we put worksheets in the product, which was an addition to the interactive questions. They were like sort of static questions. And one of the big benefits to that was because there are things that you sort of can't do or is very difficult to do in that interactive step-by-step landscape. Things that are really important to be able to assess a student's ability to understand mathematics, which are the reasoning, the understanding, those sorts of things. Can they explain their thinking? Can they justify? And all of those open-ended questions. And so by adding the worksheets, we're able to add that layer of depth to the questions. And so a lot of that appears in a print book. So it's definitely not dead. There's a place for it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's where we've kind of landed, is this giving teachers options and flexibility. And that's one of the big core beliefs at Mathspace, is that teachers understand their students best and they understand what's best for their classrooms. And so, just giving the teachers the opportunity to dip in and out of technology. And that's one of the early feedback we've been getting, is just just great to be able to have that one resource where I can be online and be offline, whether you're printing worksheets and using just the digital, or, your school likes to have the physical textbooks. So that option is there. So,
Yeah, so on that, we thought we'd ask you, whereabouts are you on that balance between print and digital? So yeah, we definitely believe that being data-led and data-driven is really important. Using data can really help streamline the way a teacher can address all the needs in a very large, varied classroom. So for me, why print is because I believe so passionately in that. I want to be in as many schools as possible. And for some schools, the only way in is through the funding that they get provided to be able to purchase textbooks. Once we've got textbooks, we can talk about how being able to supplement that with our digital product, and then being data-led and data-driven will be like all the way. So I still think the textbook will be dead at some point. At some point, but maybe not in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to question that. I feel like there's going to be a place for it for some people for all the time, and that's okay. Yeah. One of the interesting things in that you'll see today is how having the print has probably forced us to think more about a lot of the open-ended questions. And while we've had them inside Mathspace in the worksheets, we haven't given them as much attention as we have this time around. And I don't know if that's a mindset shift for us as we also build the print. All right, questions coming through.
Yeah, so now that you can see the screen, we can certainly see that we're sort of in that middle ground, somewhere balanced, a little bit leaning towards print, a little bit leaning towards digital, and very few are sort of in that fully immersive digital learning experience, or still over in only print only. So key changes. So it was advertised by Cara themselves that there was an 8% reduction in the number of content descriptions, which of course gives them an immediate sort of impression that there is less in the curriculum, and they tried to say that to some extent, but they didn't actually use those words because it's actually not true. This is true. There is an 8% reduction in the number of content descriptions. If you think about the process of adding up all of the numbers of dot points in the old one and the numbers of dot points in the new one, there is 8% less. But what that actually means is they are larger and, as I mentioned, more verbose, more general, more broad, and it actually hasn't reduced the content any. They did add a bit more of an emphasis in other areas. So, of course, there's the new emphasis in modelling and higher order thinking, those sorts of things. So they sort of added more rather than reduced. So I have a couple of examples I'll just briefly mention around the content. So one thing, actually, before I get to this slide, is, for example, around volume. So one thing you may not know, if you're a high school teacher, is they completely removed volume from the new primary curriculum. So now they'll come to you in grade 7 and they'll have never seen or done anything with volume before. Whereas before, in the previous curriculum, they would have done a bit of the scaffolding, a bit of the basics. They would have looked at volume as being something, you know, the way that you compact space into a three-dimensional object. They probably would have done some practical activities with blocks, and they would have made an array and stacked them up, and they would have had this sort of impression of sort of a unit cube and the space. But they took all of that out of grade 6 and 5. So that means for us, this wasn't really a reduction. What we had to do was actually add in a bit extra. So what we did in grade 7 is we had to bring that work that we'd previously scaffolded, sorry, one moment, in grade 5 and 6, we had to bring that in to grade 7. So there was essentially an addition of content in that regard. So you'll see on my screen here on the left, we're in our volume chapter for grade 7. And we've had to add in a couple of extra sections because we have to scaffold that volume in. The requirement for grade 7 is the same as it was, to be able to find the volume of prisms. And we get to that, of course, at the end of the chapter. But you can't just arrive at that when they haven't done any of that previous scaffolding. So we've had to scaffold that in. So we talk about volume using unit cubes, which was previously in the primary curriculum, units of volume, and then obviously we get into volumes of right prisms. So that's one example of where we've had to sort of make some adjustments. Another was in area. What you see on the screen here is the development, or the sort of the outcomes, if you like, from 7 through 9 on the development of area. One thing that we do know as mathematics teachers is that somewhere in high school we talk about the areas of special quadrilaterals like trapeziums and kites and rhombuses. But if you search for those words in the Australian curriculum, you won't find them. So they, in their reduction, in their 8% of dot points, they removed some words that were kind of pretty essential. So it's not that we don't expect to do that, it's just that it's not explicitly written anymore. So we had to sort of unpack a bit of that. I've got an example I'll skip to. This is sort of an example of how we sort of unpack the different sort of contents, and we look at how it flows from one place to another. It's all very non-digital, as you can see. But through this sort of an idea, what we understand is how mathematics develops. And of course, we've been doing this for a lot of different countries for a fair while. And we know that we do need areas of special quadrilaterals at some point. So what we decided to do was, in terms of the best scope and sequence for the development, both of the age of the students, the readiness, and where it fits in the Australian curriculum, was to keep it in grade 8, which is where it was. It's just not mentioned there anymore. So you'll see over here in 907 in our grade 8 book, we've kept the area of special quadrilaterals. So even though there's an 8% reduction, the content itself hasn't sort of changed much. It's the way that they've emphasized different things may have changed. The order and the development is much the same, except for volume, where they sort of threw that a bit later. So it's not really any lighter. So where people said it was overpacked and still sort of crowded, that is true. It's the same feedback that we had on the original curriculum. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just say, like, I took this photo of Erin And this is what Erin does in her time at Mathspace, is just kind of like, what is the right development? So, you know, what should we put in grade 7, 8, 9, and 10? So a lot of the work that Erin does is kind of decipher this curriculum and then say, okay, what's the right progression to make sure that we have the content in, and yeah, so this is chapter 6 of grade 8 that we were looking at. And yeah, and it was just a case of like, well, you know, those kinds of questions of like, what if we don't want to include, what's the right progression, where we need to add something maybe not in the curriculum, but it's kind of essential in order so that they can hit a curriculum dot point after. Yeah, so that was like the example of the trapeziums that you saw there was one of those kinds of things. So what we've done and what Erin's, you know, spends the majority of her time doing at Mathspace is kind of going, okay, how do I unpack this curriculum into something that's a nice sequence that we can get and what goes into 7, 8, 9, 10 as we go through.
Like, this is literally my full-time job, and I understand that teachers in the classroom, having come from a decade of teaching experience, don't have that time to do this on top of their ordinary full-time job. So I hope that by us doing this work, it saves you from having to do it as well. Yeah. Okay, so some of the structural changes, this was one thing that they announced pretty heavily in a couple of their media releases around embedding this expectation of mathematical proficiencies. Of course, these proficiencies existed in the prior curriculum. It just wasn't, it was sort of on the website, it was kind of as an aside, it sort of wasn't embedded throughout. So these words you'll find all the way through all the content descriptions, the achievement standards. It's not just sort of a little document saying, please do these things. It's we're expecting that this is just part of everyday mathematics. And the way that we've handled that is through, go to the flipbook. Let's start there. Yeah, could you just find the decimals page for me? Oh, was there a link? Yes, you. Yeah. No. It's going to go to 13, but it will take its time. So those 4 mathematical proficiencies. So as you'll see on the screen here, we've got understanding, fluency, reasoning, problem solving is on the next page. So what are they? What sort of questions can you expect in each of these sections? So an understanding question sort of does one of 2 things. It is an indication of, are they ready? Do they have the prior knowledge? Like if you imagine a massive network, which we've actually built because this network supports our diagnostic product in the back end. Imagine where every single node is a little mathematical skill and we've sort of got network diagrammed them all together. So imagine then I know what skill this particular section is trying this, and I will go, what comes before it? What was the essential skill that they sort of need to understand to be able to have success or apply that in this new context? So that's one part of the understanding. The second is, I sort of joke, it's the what's in the box, right? So if we switch back to the lesson here, you know, textbooks have these little boxes, which is the summary. So if they don't read anything else on the page, they can get the important bit from the box. So an understanding question is, do they know what we're talking about? For example, remember when you're standing at the front of the classroom and you're talking, you've done your 15 minutes, so this is what it is, and you might have done an example. How do you know your students heard what you said? You're going to turn around to them and you're going to ask them a few questions to see if they're sort of on board. Yes, we're doing area. What is area? So that's what an understanding question is. Have they heard you? Doesn't mean they can do it, but that they generally know what it is we're about to engage in. Fluency is, that's what all textbooks do very well. You're very familiar with these. It's like the basic do type thing. They're the one-step application of the concept that we're looking at. There won't be anything too complex here. We'll save that for a bit later, but there can still be worded questions because it can still be just that direct application of the concept that we're looking at. In a reasoning section, that is where we want to do something that steps more towards, it's like a bridge between fluency and problem solving. Can we think about this concept and can we explain it? It's really stepping into those higher order skills, the critical thinking skills. So can they, for example, explain their thinking? You'll see some questions here that do that, explain why. There'll be things like error detection, so looking at someone else's solution and being able to follow the solution that's given and identify where an error has happened. There'll be things like interpolation or extrapolation of ideas. There might be identify a pattern and continue it. There's a good example of the patterns here. You'll notice down here in question 14 that we provide one piece and they apply that pattern in relation to the concept that we're exploring. So that's reasoning. And problem solving is the last section. So my team would call these complex unfamiliar questions. So it's more than a one-step application. It might be multiple steps. It'll definitely be unfamiliar, so in a way that they sort of haven't seen it before. It might combine concepts from previous year levels or earlier in that same level together. So this is that idea of trying to mesh all of mathematics together to see it as a united thing rather than, oh, there's measurement and then there's statistics. And also one of my favorites in this section is where we provide more information than is needed and they have to identify which of the numbers they need. So a really good example of this is, say, for example, in area. We all do this, right, when we're teaching area, and they'll do area, they'll do lots of questions, and then the kids just get used to smashing those numbers together. Oh, we're multiplying, we just multiply all the numbers I see on the screen, we multiply them together. And when you add in an extra number, either they're going to multiply all three, they don't get area, or they have to identify which of those two contributes to the area, and then you know that they've really got it. So that's sort of all encompassed in problem solving as well. So this mathematical fluencies, we've got through the whole section of the curriculum from 7 through 10. Every single section of the book has those 4 levels of mathematical proficiencies. Anything on that?
Yeah. No, so one thing you'll notice is that we won't have, for example, a subtopic on problem solving anymore on application problems, because they've actually been embedded throughout. And I think it's just a much better way to approach problem solving, as it's something that's consistently done as part of your everyday and not just like a thing on the side, that extension piece. Yeah, I think you might want to talk about the question pathways and the differentiated pathways as well.
So you'll see at the start of this section, we've got these differentiated pathways. There are 3 levels. Broadly speaking, you can kind of consider them easy, medium, and hard. We know that this sort of level of differentiation, is something that's really useful from a teacher for on the fly, so you can group your students. But also, different students would attempt different pathways depending on the concept areas. We know that not all students are necessarily good at all types of mathematics. Some are very visual, they like the geometry and the measurement, and some are very abstract, they like the algebra and the equations. So this gives the ability to sort of offer that differentiation throughout. One thing that was really, really important to us was to make sure that each differentiated pathway is exposed to all 4 mathematical proficiencies. So just because you're doing an easier pathway does not mean you cannot problem solve. It absolutely means you can problem solve and you can reason. It just means you might understand and reason and problem solve on slightly different questions than someone who's doing the Trailblazer pathway. So if we just pick out an example here, so you can see here that Trailblazer is going to be doing question 20, which is the last question in the problem solving set. So that's this last one. So it's more complex. There's definitely more multi-steps. There's more interpretation. That's the question where we're combining a different concept together because we're bringing in perimeter. And the easier pathway is doing something that's slightly more straightforward, but still fits within our problem solving framework. Another question 2, I think, is in our reasoning question. Yes. So you'll see here this last reasoning question, which seems certainly more involved, is for the higher pathway, but the easy and the medium pathways still do the reasoning or do the pattern identification and application and things like that. So that's certainly something that's really important. So all pathways cover all 4 proficiencies in every single section from 7 through 10. Well, we're here to probably just easily mention the worked examples. You'll see here in the book, we've got this one matches to example 1. So to be able to offer support, they can come back, see the exact question, how it's done. They can also jump online, and in the online version, there'd be a video that they'd be able to watch to actually see how that question can be done and explained by a teacher. Anything else?
No, I mean, you've covered everything there.
Yeah.
it's been a real hit as we've shown teachers around this differentiated pathway. It's something that teachers often do on their own. So it's just kind of handy that we've taken that first stab at showing it. And it means we've spent a lot of time thinking about how can we make an easy problem solving question so that everybody can have access to that. Yeah, which has been a challenge, I can tell you, to really think about, you know, are we addressing different difficulty levels with some of these higher order thinking questions?
We talked about that. So there's a quote on the screen. It's quite long. It's actually really interesting, though. You may not have caught it either. It was from the Australian newspaper, probably 6 weeks ago now, by David Cafello, who happens to be our CEO of Akara. And the key point I wanted to point out here was this sentence: starting with school leaders will need human skills that are not easily replicated by machines, such as creativity, problem solving, adaptability, ethical awareness, emotional self-regulation, teamwork, and critical thinking. Of course, he was talking about AI because it's been quite topical, and certainly was when he wrote this opinion piece with the evolution of ChatGPT, if you like, and then all of a sudden the response from education around Australia and how different jurisdictions / schools, or whether it was Catholic or independent or other sorts of public systems, how they handled that. So I mean, it's not surprising that our CEO would mention these keywords, because those keywords that are in that final sentence are throughout our entire curriculum. They both reflect their new emphasis in the curriculum on higher order thinking skills, as well as our general capabilities. So it was a nice opinion piece. He did say AI wasn't something to be feared, because we still need this element of human skills and humanizing education, if you like. Let's have a bit of a breather. We'll order these 3 questions. Actually, what the question is to order 3 of these from least to most important in terms of what your daily considerations are in your mathematics classes. So we've got things like, does it need to be digitally engaging? Do we need to be able to provide differentiation, which we've just discussed? How important is that to you on the daily? Are you all about having mathematical conversations? Do you most want to consider how I can cover the theory that's required to understand the concepts? Maybe for you, that's wrapped up in how much do you do explicit face-to-face and how much do you incorporate a flipped classroom model where they might look at that before they come to class? And the last option there was around misconceptions. So certainly coming through, we've got a large group that finds differentiation important, and we all know that. In one of the most recent research studies done in Australia, I think it might have been out of the last PISA, they said that an average Year 9 Australian classroom spans a range of 7 years. And that's actually grown from the previous time, which I think was 5. So, yeah, certainly a very broad range. So differentiation on the daily and on the fly is really, really important. I remember that. Cover the theory is really important. And yeah, some ability to relate to it. That's what that number 3 is there is about. Real world tangible context, like can the students relate? And in that regard, making sure that you're sort of familiar with who your students are so that you can adjust context to suit something that might be suitable for them. My favorite is number 4 there. That's normalize having conversations about mathematics. I used to have dreams about being a philosopher sitting under a tree and having all my students gather and we could just talk about mathematics and how wonderful it was. I did do that quite a bit. I was that crazy teacher. I was always taking the kids out under a tree, chalk drawings on all the pathways, but certainly conversations is pretty important. That comes out through the reasoning and the understanding sections of our content, because being able to reason can be something that could be done verbally by students if they cannot necessarily write it down. So having conversations about it is a way of being able to assess students' ability to do that. Yeah, fantastic. So out of that, and combined with David's quote around humanising education, the new curriculum has this. They say that they strengthen the importance of their ability to do this real world context through opportunities to engage in these key things: mathematical modelling, computational thinking, statistical investigation, simulations, and that's all sort of big stuff. They're things that take a bit of time. So how have we handled that? So let's look at where it appears in the group. I'll do this pretty quickly. Across 7 to 10, this is just one example because you can see how many words there are. I couldn't fit them all for 7 to 10 on the screen at the same time. But basically do something with modelling in these 3 strands: number, measurement, and algebra. In probability strand, they have this simulation strand right across. Actually, it goes right from 3 through 10, the simulation. So it's around usually using digital simulations, and that's to be able to generate large numbers of experiments and then apply the probability concepts that they've been doing in each grade level using those. In the space strand, which used to be called geometry, they've got this computational thinking strand, which is around sort of algorithms, being able to design and create them, which is topical. It's actually something that Victoria's been doing for the last 10 years. So it's a way that the states and the national curriculum have aligned there. And then in statistics, we've got statistical investigations. This is not necessarily new. It's something that has been in the curriculum, but there's definitely an emphasis. And you can see how similar the wording of these questions are, of these outcomes are. And they do that right through from 3 through 10 as well. So what's going on here? Well, if we look back, and I'm just going to flick through, we've got number, measurement, algebra, probability, space, and statistics. They are our 6 strands in the Australian curriculum. So basically what we're seeing here is do something open-ended, higher order thinking that is in this modelling vein in all of the strands. So it's basically saying it's super important. It actually makes up about 1/3 of the curriculum, and we want you to do that across the board in all the content, in all the ways. So again, an 8% reduction, sure, but the ones that they've added, huge, big things to think about. So how have we handled that? Well, let's think about what we need to do in terms of mathematical modelling. So if you just Google mathematical modelling, you'll find heaps of diagrams that look a bit like this, flowcharts, how to do things. This particular one is from the AMT, which is a publication produced by the Australian Association of Math Teachers. There's statistical inquiry, which is basically mathematical modelling, but with a statistical lens. But I sort of break all of that down to 4 steps. So if we can try and all get a hold of these 4 steps, then we'll be a long way into implementing modelling in our classrooms. So formulate a problem, construct the model, analyse it, iterate on it, test it, do all those sorts of things, use it basically, and then interpret the answer in context. So those 4 things are a very big generalization on the modelling process or the statistical inquiry process. And you can Google those and get into those in great depth. But if this is kind of new, or you're trying to think on the fly about how you can incorporate this in your classroom, these 4 steps will help. Formulate a problem. That's basically get your real world context and create a sort of idea, identify what is the problem I'm trying to solve and how can I solve that using mathematics. Construct the model, come up with the equation, write the simulation, source the data, analyze the model, find a way, iterate, test on it, and interpret the answer in context. So that's big. The whole modelling cycle is to do those 4 things and maybe little loops around each one. So let's jump to an example in our book. Do you have that linked? No.
Click on it on the actual image. Yeah. Keep putting that password in.
So within the books across 7 through 10, we've provided examples of investigation. So this is remembering that we're doing the whole 4-step process. So it's iterative, it's long. it's involved and you want students to have the opportunity to attempt it and come back and sort of re-enter in at different stages and phases of the investigation. Sometimes these investigations, I mean, they're all great. You could use them as they are. Sometimes, though, they are just enough to be able to look at and go, oh, that's right. We've got that great thing that we did already. I've got that great activity that I did at my last school. Or actually, this is a really great idea, but for my kids, I'm going to change the context because I know it's sort of the audience and the types of students that I've got, and I know a better way to engage them in the real world aspect of that. This is an opening. I can go to the digital one.
Go to the digital one. Let's see. Mathspace is. Oh, let me just show up. It might have just shown up.
I did it. Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's an example of an investigation. So you'll see it here on the right. This is to do with our computational thinking one, which you'll remember is in our geometry strand. This particular one is around developing a flowchart type algorithm to sort shapes based on their properties. So you'll see that there is a couple of different phases. And we've got some investigation points down here. There's an example over here. And then we've got more investigations and a wrap-up discussion at the end, like a reflection. So that in its entirety walks through that whole cycle, that four-step process. So, and remember how I said, you know, we sort of want it to be the ability for them to go and come back. That's what we do, right, when we're faced with sort of more complicated problems, is we say to each other, oh, just leave it, come back tomorrow with fresh eyes. It's exactly the same with these big investigations. What I'll do is I'll just show you this. So the investigations are something that we want to take a couple of lessons to do, or you might want to set as Friday afternoons for 4 or 5 weeks whilst we do this particular topic. Something that they can do a little bit, go away, come back, fresh eyes, and have new ideas and inject that into the investigation. Whilst I'm here, I thought it would be worth to show you that within the book, what we do is we try and structure these subtopics in a way so that it's an expected amount of work. That's really important for me as a teacher at heart, to know that when I'm going in and I'm doing 1101 versus 1103, that it's still a lesson's worth of work. Because you don't want to sort of go in and go, oh, I'm going to need 3 lessons to do this, when then you go in with a different section and you only needed half a lesson to do it. So these are all expected amounts of work based on our teaching experience. And so we make sure that there's enough content, that there's enough explorations, that there's a good amount of differentiation through the questions, so that it's expected amount of work. The exception being investigations, which, as I've said, should be in and out. So they could be 2 or 3 lessons long, or they could be something that you run on an afternoon over the entire term or something like that. So that's the full cycle. Another way to handle that sort of broad sort of modeling standards, if you like, is to think about each of those 4 parts in isolation. So we've got the formulate the model, the construct it, the analyze it, and the test the answer in context. And we do that regularly throughout the book through the use of explorations. Would you like to take that one, Ray?
Sure, let's take a look at.
Let's go.
Okay. Cool. So, yeah. So one thing just on those investigations, just the amount of content and effort that's kind of gone into that. We, on average, we're looking at it, have about 1 investigation per topic. And I think that's kind of a good thing. And it's not 1 per topic. It kind of depends on the curriculum and which topics are better for investigation. So definitely things like statistics, you might have more of them. Things like algebra, you might have none, where it's more fluency based. But there's a lot in there. And I also like the way that you've got to kind of have them out into multiple activities. So you can kind of, maybe if you don't have time to do it all, we know it's a busy, crowded curriculum, that you can make sure you get some exposure to it, not necessarily do the entire thing. But these explorations are just another great way to kind of, as Erin was saying, just model like 1 part of it. So these are scattered throughout the lessons. You'll see them called out in the textbook as interactive exploration, and an indication to kind of go online to do it. And, there's a bunch of these, just an opportunity to kind of visualize the math as you go through. And so they're scattered throughout. On average, we were looking at it as well, maybe 1 every 2 subtopics has these explorations. Not all of them are interactive. So some of them are kind of static images and some questions around that as well, because it's important that we don't force everybody to jump online when not everybody has that kind of access. But a good portion of them are interactive, and we've got a lot of them scattered throughout. A lot of focus around the kind of questions that you can get with this as well. So it's not just kind of play with a GeoGebra applet, but it's how do you kind of engage with it to answer questions and explore one of those cycles of the modeling process. And you might want to talk into the teacher side.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the digital side, if we switch to the teacher guide, for that same exploration we were just looking at, what we can see here are a couple of really key things. So on the fly, we know teachers are time poor, right? So you've thrown up this applet, students are having a bit of a look, or they're playing in pairs, and then you're like, okay, what are they looking for? Well, we provide ideal student responses. What are you trying to hear? What is the language? What is the direction of their exploration that you want to encourage and sort of celebrate? So the ideal responses are there. The purposeful questions are sort of the overarching things that we can ask at the end to sort of summarize it. Have they sort of got what we want them to get out of it? And misunderstanding, so important to be able to be reminded of what those misunderstandings or misconceptions that they might have at the time. The quicker we get on top of those, the more time and learning time we'll save for the student. So often we already know what they are, but it's really good to see that reminder. However, we know we've got so many teachers who are teaching mathematics from out of area. So if they're not familiar enough, they can read this and go, oh yes, I'll keep an eye out for that. And if I see that or hear that, I'll know to correct that misunderstanding.
Yeah. As I've been showing teachers this one, it's kind of a mini lesson plan, and it's really kind of, it's not just a case of like, okay, here's an interesting applet, but how do you turn that into something like a really engaging learning opportunity as you go through? And we hope that these teacher guides will really help that as you go through. So yeah, that's not the only thing we have in the teacher guides.
Yeah. So at the top here, we've also got a range of other supports. So for every single section in the book from 7 through 10, there's a reminder of some really useful targeted instructional strategies. So if you're going to do something hands-on, or sort of you want to run a group activity, or you wanted to do something, be reminded of a way that I could run this or get this concepts over in an effective way, we've got some reminders there. We've got English language learner supports and students with special needs supports, as well as misconceptions for the entire concept area. So again, useful reminders, and for people who are out of area, there might be stuff in there that they weren't aware of and something they can keep track of. Yeah, so really amazing addition to the product for 2024 is the teacher notes. So that's the modeling, right? So we talked about how there's opportunities to do the full cycle. There's let me go back to here. Opportunities to do the parts, and any one of those parts is really useful. And that helps us with the opportunities to develop those higher order thinking skills throughout, which is about 1/3 of the curriculum. So just remember, you don't have to do the investigations. That's not the only way you can assess those outcomes. You can do it on those little micro parts all the way through, including even questions from the actual textbook themselves. For example, that final part was interpret answers in context. We do this all the time, right? So we're doing a question, the answer is 4.5 people. And we turn to the class and we say, what does that mean? Let's interpret that in context. Can I have half a person? In this particular case, can I have half a person? When can I have half a person? That's all part of that process. So if you are in a school where you sort of need to assess all of those particular standards in some way, keeping track of those moments is also evidence for students' ability to handle and contribute to those modelling outcomes.
A question from Cheryl. Is there a teacher introduction for every topic?
Yes, so every single topic we've got an overarching thing around what is it that's in that topic. I can show you the digital product, yes. So by the topic view, we've got what's in the topic, what are the big ideas that we're about to uncover through the exploration of these little sections, and then within each section. there is the teacher guide. So each section has a teacher guide that covers those 4 supports. If there's an exploration, we cover those things that we've gone over and what the point of each sort of little section of an idea is within it. So yeah, thanks, Cheryl.
Debbie has asked regarding the GeoGebra applets for students to explore, is there an equivalent in the print textbook? It's like a website for students to access.
We don't have any links apart from just a redirection into the digital product. There are some that are non-digital though, and there's also the questions that we would have asked on the applet appear in the print textbook. So if you don't have access to the digital or you can't project the GeoGebra up on the screen yourself, then you can still explore those questions by probably drawing stuff on a board as we used to.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one is we'll see a lot of teachers probably intend to use this more as something that they'll project up on the board, you know, where you don't have access to one-to-one devices. So again, we call them out in the textbook. So in the textbook, you'll see interactive exploration, and we actually show the questions that are associated. So you get a good idea of what that interactive might look like. And then if you feel like, oh, this is a really good one, you could always kind of project it on the big screen yourself and not have students engage with it themselves, depending on your device situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the 10A, that's the elephant in the room. We came up on our, what was your first impressions? So let me go back 10 years and talk about what happened in the room when we were writing the Australian curriculum. We were writing this and we're like, oh, this is amazing. We'll have opportunities for extension for all the students in grade 10. This is a real great activity to explore in terms of design thinking, because what they did then, when I put it on the website, they went 7, 8, 9, 10, 10A. Oh, here are the outcomes for 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, we'll label all the outcomes for 10A. It looked like a course. It actually wasn't designed to be a course. It was actually meant to be what it is now, which is opportunities for extension for all students. It turned into a course because it looked like a course. So they've changed that design problem. You'll see if you go looking for it, it's in a PDF hidden away on the website. It's no longer looks like a course. Of course, it's not to say that there isn't a need to try and extend a group of students who are definitely heading for that higher mathematical levels beyond grade 10. That happens. You will definitely have students, a group of students per se, maybe, who are ready for that, and you'll group them all together and you'll run through maybe higher level sort of optional content with them. But the entire sort of focus and purpose for what they have done now with regards to optional content is to make it very clear that students should not be exposed to it just because they're not in a 10A class. Every student in grade 10 should have the capacity to engage in optional content or an extension type application if they're ready, willing, able, if the teacher has time, all those sorts of things. Let me show you how we've handled that, because actually I think this is something that we've done exceptionally well. I'm very proud of the way we've got this set up. So here is an example of our Year 10 book. Actually, we'll zoom in on this content page for you. So this will be the same as what you get in the print book. So they're one-to-one matching, which is really, really important. So everything that you sort of see in the printed textbook with regards to like the lessons or the sets of questions, it's exactly the same in the digital product. So, oh, you don't have your computer, that's great, use a book. Oh, you don't have your book, that's okay, get on the computer. So I want to make sure that was really clear. So the intention of the optional content is that wherever possible, extend the students. So every single topic in grade 10, we have optional content. We've looked at the topic development where they've come through from 7 through 10. What is the natural extension that happens next, and scaffolded that in. So every single topic. So this is topic 1. You'll see here we get some optional content at the end. Into algebra now, we've got the core content, and then at the end, optional content. Jump down to circles, we've got some core content, and at the end, some optional content. There's even some entire topics that are optional, so like your further trigonometry, where they get into their trig functions or the permutations and combinations. But every single topic, core work, down to optional content. So we've covered everything that's in the PDFs that you can find hidden away in the Akara website. All of that is included in here, but we have more because I wanted to make sure that every topic had that natural extension. So it's about thinking if you are going to run a specialized course for students who are more at that top end, this is not something you'll just add on to 10. It's something that you'll go, oh, these students are all ready for it. Let's move them up. We'll start them further in. They can get further through. And you will just choose which of this optional content is suitable to you based on your students' sort of abilities and their interests, maybe which topics they're enjoying more than others. Do we have any questions that have come in about that? Normally there are.
No questions on that.
Yeah,
but I'm sure we'll get some as we go on. I've been answering some questions as we go through. Yeah. I like how you there's some topics that are completely optional, and you'll see that. And there are other, but most of them are actually they're embedded within. So there's just those opportunities to extend.
And these are set up in exactly the same way as every part of the book. So in the optional content, you'll still have the lessons with the explorations. There's an exploration there. You'll still have the sets of questions that have all the 4 proficiency strands, and there'll still be differentiated pathways, even in the optional content. What that might mean is you'll have some students who are in grade 10 who can engage in the optional content, and they can engage in the easy pathway. So just think about what's most suitable to your students, and even to some degree, what are the skills of the teachers you've got teaching the grade 10 classes.
I just really like this one. I was looking at it before, reviewing some of the year 10 content with Erin, and just like, I love how like the kinds of conversations you can have about that with the unit circle and seeing what those graphs look like. You can imagine, that's the kind of thing that just really excites me. So I hope you all get a chance to do a lot of this optional content, because it's really great content that's going to kind of really get students ready for those higher courses. But even if not, even if it's just like they're not going to go on to do higher courses, but they've shown that they're good at measurement, and you've got a bit of time and you can kind of throw it. The other really nice thing is it could be just on a student by student basis.
Exactly.
So a student who might not be a really high flyer at mathematics, but has got a bit of a knack for probability and wants to extend themselves, there's nothing really stopping them jumping on and even on their own, kind of exploring a lot of that optional content. So it's a really good move to kind of hopefully build just lifelong learners in mathematics. And that's not necessarily a course that you must complete all of it or none of it.
The only thing that you have to do is make sure you cover the core content, and then beyond that, it's as far as sort of possible as you sort of get each of your students through. All right. It's also important to remember too that the methods courses, it doesn't require 10A as a prerequisite. The best preparation you can give your year 10 students is that they have done core, and they have done core really, really well. That they know the depth and breadth of that, they can connect the concepts together, they can articulate it, they can do all of the reasoning, the justification, they can do the problem solving. If they've got that nailed, they will be absolutely fine going into methods. They don't have to have seen the optional content to have success there.
One thing you'll notice is that we've got this actually set up in just one textbook, and that was kind of an important thing for us, and something that, as we've spoken to teachers, they're quite happy about that, is that we're trying to be true to it's optional and everybody can access it.
Yes.
It does mean our year 10 textbook is going to be quite thick. This is a bit of a trade-off, but we think that that's the kind of better approach there, to say, look, you've got the content there, you don't have to do all of it, but it's there for everybody. Whether you're going to go on to do methods or not, you still can engage in some of that optional content.
Absolutely.
We had one question about the optional topics. So just to confirm, they aren't part of achievement standards for year 10?
No, separate. Yeah, the achievement standards for year 10 is all to do with core. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have a question: how many questions on average are there per topic in the print textbook?
Oh, per topic? Per section.
Per section.
As a number, whenever I sort of was reviewing and something would come in that would say like way over 30, I'd go, oh, that's probably too much. It depends on the concept. Some of them are very sort of more simple, so they're more one step, and you might have a few more. But as far as the differentiated pathways go, if we just quickly open one up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. So sort of 13 questions in some parts of those. Seems about normal, I suppose. So we sort of split them up across the easy, medium, and hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of a really kind of interesting use case of we've got a lot of content, very comprehensive in our coverage, a lot of practice for those who want to do more practice. But these differentiated pathways really going to give you the opportunity to say, do they really need to do every question? And so across it, probably each pathway only covers half of the questions. There's a lot of overlap between the pathways, so they're not a third, because there's definitely a lot of overlap. So yeah, in some ways, we're kind of looking at it as there's a lot of content there, but you don't have to do all of it as you go through. But if you do want to have like lots of extra practice, then you can see there's a lot of that as well.
That's right. So not the pathways there won't be a pathway that says do the whole set. With the top end, we'll have tailed it up towards the harder ones, and with the lower end, we'll have tailed it down towards the lower one. There's effectively 3 worksheets in one in every sort of section. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, we've got 2 more questions.
Yes.
We've got that one covered actually. And do you envisage classes working through the content in order over 1 year? Is the chapter ordered a suggested sequence?
All of our books, actually, if I just go to the contents page, have the same sort of general order. We put the number and algebra at the start, measurement geometry in the beginning, and statistics and probability at the end. So no, I wouldn't expect you to work from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, because that would mean there'll be a lot of schools that would never get to statistics because they run out of time. And that actually happens a lot. I've been to a lot of schools where they never get to probability because that is always the last thing they did at the end. So it's not a suggested sequence from beginning to end. It's a expected and reliable way of being able to present the content, so you can be familiar with how all of the content is presented. Obviously, you'd want to do number before you do algebra and linear relationships. But yes, things like probability and statistics, you could spread throughout, or sort of do one each semester, something like that. So I always liked the way that the primary curriculum coordinators tended to do it, which was sort of just do something with the 3 strands every term, which is now 6 strands, but you get the idea.
Within the strands, the order is
within the topic from beginning to end. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you'll see that with things like if we do directed numbers before fractions, then inside fractions we'll make sure we include directed numbers, and vice versa. So it's kind of important for within a strand, but across strands, pick and choose according to your order.
Exactly. And at the beginning of the lessons too, on the digital product, there is sort of what has come before it. So it might be from the year before, it might be from somewhere else in the book. That helps teachers get a bit of a feel for the flow and what should students know before they're engaging in this current content. Yeah, cool. I might just stick to your computer, and we've got another minute. I just want to really make sure that everyone has a look. I know a lot of you already use Mathspace, just to get that kind of what's in the print, what's in the digital. Can you flip me to your other? Okay, so just looking at where is your? I've lost your. There we go. So okay. So this student lesson, as Erin was saying, is kind of an exact match for the textbook. So you don't, if you have a Mathspace digital subscription and you're a fully digital ready school, you don't need to have the Mathspace textbook. It really is kind of just an option for you. We don't want you to purchase the textbook if you don't need the textbook. But if you find it, like what we're hearing from a lot of schools, they might get some class sets to kind of deal with their just digital readiness. Students don't always bring their laptops, etc. Other schools really want the physical textbook because they want a time where they just don't want kids on their laptops at all. So it's really just up to you. But we're not gatekeepers. We want to make sure that's one thing that we do. When you buy a Mathspace subscription, you get access to all the textbooks. You don't just get the Year 7 textbook because that's all you paid for. So that was kind of really important to us, that we don't gatekeep the content, and we don't force people to buy textbooks. Everything in the print textbook is in the digital as you go through. So the student lessons exact match, like we said, where there's an interactive exploration, it will be called out in the textbook as something you can do extra. Teacher guides are digital only, and we talked a lot about those and what you can expect to see there.
And on the practice section, a lot of you hopefully are familiar that we separate these practice out into two parts, adaptive and worksheet. I think we've changed our layout a little bit with these new textbooks, but the idea is you have the worksheet, and this is an exact match of what you have in the print book as you go through, so you can kind of explore that. And then with the understanding, the fluency, the reasoning, problem solving, all the same as the textbook, and all that kind of depth of coverage that you have in there. And then you have your adaptive, which has, you can notice there'll be some overlap, but not necessarily the same. So certainly a lot of the fluency is covered really well. Some of the problem solving, but not all of the problem solving, definitely not the reasoning. A lot of the reasoning is kind of more open-ended, justify. So sometimes we'll have that in there, but it'll be multiple choice, it'll be scaffolded, and sometimes we won't. So generally you can think of the adaptive questions that you've already come to know. We've started to kind of put them into this new textbook. There'll be more, so coming in. Some of the problem solving which were previously in other topics, standalone subtopics, we'll kind of have a look through and get them back into their appropriate parts now that we've kind of embedded problem solving within. So there's a bit of work for us to do there, and we'll have that all done before the start of next year, but just wanted to kind of clear out that you have the access to the print on offline and online, and you can pick and choose. And that's been a really big thing that we're hearing from schools, is just that choice. Teacher choice is a really big thing for us at Mathspace. You know, you can choose to do adaptive tasks, or you can choose to customize it. We want to give you the opportunity to kind of decide. You can choose to assign something to the whole class, or you can choose to assign to certain individuals. No matter how good our AI and adaptive learning and all of that gets, and the algorithms get smarter, nobody understands their students like their teacher. So we always want to put that control in your hands. So I think this is a kind of an awesome opportunity for people to dip in and out of the digital. They say, you know, we've done 10.01 now. In class, we're going to do, you know, pen and paper practice. And then at home, those who want some extra help can do the adaptive questions and get the step-by-step feedback in the videos as they're walking through that. So yeah, I want to touch on that. We'll go through any questions, and anyone who wants to stick around, I might give you a little sneak peek of some of the new AI features that we've been working on. So we had a comment about 11 math methods being so full to teach and to cover in 3 terms. Yes, it's just more of a comment than a question there. You know, I think hopefully some of the idea of the optional content is you might be able to kind of get people started on that.
Also, if we really, and I can't emphasize this enough, if we really get core really well nailed, you won't need to do as much revision in the 11 methods course, and you'll be able to get through it. There's a lot of time that we take up teaching that 11 methods course because we're revising all of the algebra, or we're revising all of the quadratics. But if they really get core, then you can skip a bit of that.
Yeah. Don't think you have answered the most popular question, Patrick. If you can tell me what that one is, I haven't really been looking at popularity of the questions. So if you can retype the most popular questions, I'll definitely have a look at that.
Publicly, maybe
I typed it and answered privately. So to just retype that. Your other question, Patrick, was how is your textbook different from the Cambridge textbook format? I'm not that familiar with the Cambridge textbook format.
No. Maybe if you want to be specific about something that you've, I mean, most textbooks I think are moving all towards something that's quite similar anyway. They're going to have lessons and worked examples and question sets. So.
Yeah, I can only tell you from what I've heard as we've kind of spoken to about a lot of schools showing them our textbook. So that was the most popular question apparently. So the big things that we're hearing is that we do investigations really well, and we do the explorations within there really well. So I think what I've heard from schools is our question sets are really kind of on par. So there's a lot of that kind of like and then obviously the digital side is where Mathspace really stands out with a lot of our content on the digital side. Our skills view, not just the textbook view that we go through. I can kind of talk about that briefly for anyone that wants to stay on. But they're the kinds of big things. So it's otherwise, I think our question sets, I've always heard great things about Cambridge's question sets, and so teachers have been telling us that we're on par with that, which is it's great to hear. And I encourage everybody really to new curriculum. It's kind of an opportunity to look at what's out there. I always encourage people to please pick the best resources for your students. It was funny, I was in a meeting where we're talking to the head of maths, and the deputy principal, who was a former head of maths as well, was in the room. And the head of maths was saying, like, they're really excited about the investigations, the explorations, and all of this, and there was a bit of resistance saying, oh, but a lot of my teachers have gotten used to a particular, style with the textbook that we're using, and I'm kind of worried about my teachers. And the deputy principal said, hang on, we're not going to pick resources that are best for our teachers. Yeah. We're going to pick the resources that are best for our students. And that resonates a lot with me. I think I'd love everybody to take a look at what's out there. It's a curriculum change. It's an opportunity to really kind of make changes, and pick the best resources for your students. Pick the things that's going to help your students the most. And if that's Mathspace, then fantastic. We can't wait to work with you. And if that's someone else, then fantastic. Please don't choose Mathspace, and please choose them. That's the kind of the North Star that we should all be looking at, is how can we pick the best resources for our students that's going to help them learn the most.
That's what we're passionate about, is making sure that students love maths.
Okay, thank you, Pushpa. Thank you, Patrick, for asking the most popular question. Of course, that's all going to be a decision for you all to make. So if anyone does have any questions, please do reach out. Anyone who hasn't already received a textbook at their school, we're getting a lot of demand, so we're kind of rationing them a little bit. We're going one per school first before we give multiple copies to a school. So if your school hasn't got one, then you will get one next week. So look forward to you having a look through that. We'll also send anyone who has a Mathspace subscription, your Year 7 and Year 8, look for the 2024 books.
I'll show you how to do that. In case you don't know, so if you're in your dashboard up here, there's this little change textbook button. And so in there, if you've never clicked on it, click on it. You'll see all the books that are available to your school. So you should, I've got a crazy selection, but you should have all of the Australian curriculum from 3 through 10, because like we said, we don't gatekeep the content. So you'll have them all. But you'll also see the new ones, which is the V9. So look for those. You'll see them on your books.
Yeah, look for V9 2024. So you'll have access to Year 7 and 8 already, if you have a Mathspace subscription. If you don't, we can set one up for you. So just do reach out and we'll set one up for you. You can see the Year 7 and Year 8 already. Year 9 and 10,
we can add in next week.
Next week.
Yeah. At the end of next week, we can add digital 10s.
You heard it here first. It's going to be in a kind of draftish state, obviously. But
it'll be there'll be 3 chapters I'm working on. It'll be great. You'll see it.
Right. I can't wait. I can't wait. Year 10 and all the optional content looks really fantastic. So and then Year 9 will follow shortly after, but we are trying to get everything totally ready by 30 September. So we know a lot of you have to make book list decisions, things like that. We want to make sure that you've had a chance to review the content before you make decisions around that. All right. For anyone that does want to stay on, anyone who has to go, I know we've gone a little bit over 5 o'clock on Wednesday already.
Wednesday.
So a couple of little things on the digital side, especially if anyone hasn't seen Mathspace before. Everything we've shown you today is the textbook view. So that, looking at the curriculum by strands, what we do is
that's what I did on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
The downwards bit. Yeah.
Yeah. We're effectively kind of, when we're doing it this way, we're kind of going what slice of the curriculum am I going to teach in grade 7 when everybody is 12 or 13 years old? And what we've done at Mathspace is we have that view, and we think it's really important. Obviously, we've built print textbooks, but we also like to think about, when you're working on Year 7 patterns in algebra, it's important to kind of have this kind of vertical view of what I don't have my gaps in Year 3, 4, 5, 6 as I go through, or my extension opportunities in grade 8. So we've introduced a skills view on Mathspace. If you haven't seen it, that's what it does. It kind of it's a way to view the curriculum by here looking at number, looking at a student, I think in grade 10, and we're seeing grade 9, 8, 7, all the gaps that they have between there. And it's a way for students to really own their own learning gaps and do just enough, fill in just enough of their learning gaps for what they need to do for grade level content. So if you haven't checked that out, feel free to. And what we're kind of basically looking at is, when you're teaching this concept, what's more important, the other concepts of Year 7, or is it kind of that skills view? So having this dual view is something that we think is really important. We recommend everyone kind of spend maybe up to a day a week just getting students to own their own learning gaps. It could be a homework thing. And then
just on that, Mo, too. people say when we talk about that, I don't have time, the curriculum's already so crowded, and I don't have a lesson a week to fill in the gaps. I say you don't have time not to, because doing that develops the confidence and the knowledge and the ability in the students to be able to engage in that grade level content at a faster rate, because they've got all of that background stuff nailed. So yeah.
Awesome. And let me refresh this. I've got a little video because I'm probably not going to have time to show this off in the product. But just to give you a bit of a teaser, we've just done a beta release of Milo. An error occurred. I'll need to play a video. Let me see if I can.
From here?
Share my screen.
Yeah, I'll stop. Switch over.
All right, for those who have stayed on, I'll share my screen. And why don't we do a live one actually? Okay, always dangerous to do a live demo, but let's run the risk. So this is something that we've been working on. I'm sure you've all heard of ChatGPT. And ever since we kind of saw ChatGPT came out, we kind of were thinking about what's the best use case in education. And so obviously the first thought for a lot of people is like, oh my God, everyone's going to cheat. And so we think, yes, that's kind of going to be an important thing of just like academic integrity. But we thought, what if we can make it easier to learn than to cheat? Our belief is that students will choose to learn every time. If we make it easier to learn than to cheat, nobody goes in wanting to cheat. They go in, they cheat because
they feel like they've got no other option.
No other option. Things have become overwhelmingly challenging. So here, what we've introduced is anyone who's familiar with Mathspace will know that on the questions, you can show your step-by-step working, and you can get hints and video and work example help as you're going through. This new thing that we've introduced is the ability to chat with Milo, our AI tutor, the puppy dog tutor, and ask proactive questions in a back and forth conversation. So here I'm looking at adding these two mixed fractions, and I just want to confirm, do I just add them? And Milo says, yes, you're on the right track. To find a total amount of drink, you need to add the two mixed numbers, 5.5 and 2 1/9 liters of cordial. Okay, so first you can separate them out. All right, and then proceed with the addition as you go through, and let me know if you need any help. So as a student, you can kind of go through and engage in this way. One of the things that we get about Mathspace is sometimes students will say, they'll try and show they're working here, and they might say 7, because they're still kind of learning the idea of adding. And then we mark them wrong and they get frustrated, like, but I'm trying to show my working. Whereas over here, if they show partial working, then we're more forgiving. So that's correct. You've got the 5 and the 2. Now we need to work out 7 plus 1/2 plus 1/9. And you can ask questions as you go through. How? Milo will come back and give you some ideas about how you can start. So we're really excited about this. It's out in beta. If anyone's kind of interested in giving this a go, do reach out to your Mathspace consultant, or just use the chat support and say, I'd love to give Milo Chat a go. It's going to be free for the rest of this year. So anyone who wants to give it a go, feel free to. We are working out what pricing might look like for anyone who likes this. It will definitely be something that is optional. It's another kind of very important thing for us to do, is we don't kind of want to say, oh, now we've added this extra thing. It would be an optional thing if your students are enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. So far, looking really promising for those on the beta. Then you could have it would be something that you could look at for next year. But for the rest of this year, we'd love for you to give it a go if anyone does want to give that a go. Some fun things that we have done with it is if you ask kind of questions that are off topic, such as what is the meaning of life? So
let's get back to finding equivalent fractions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of fun, but then it's like, okay, let's get back to the question. And of course, if you say something that's like not nice to Milo, and we've also just added some safety features in there as well to alert teachers. So these are the kind of things that we're thinking about, is how do we make AI safe? How do we make it engaging? And how do we maximize learning with it, rather than think of it as like the thing, you know, we need to stop people using it. It's out there. It's how do we use it in the best possible way? All right, I want to thank Erin so much for today and for all the work she's done over 10 years at Mathspace, and particularly over the last 12 to 18 months, kind of building these new textbooks for Mathspace. I hope you enjoy them, for those of you that go on to use them, and all the best. Thank you everyone for coming along on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.